So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Taylor Clem. I am the Horticulture Extension Agent with IFAS Extension Nassau County. And this is our quarterly Florida-friendly landscaping crash course program. And today's program, we're focusing on specifically ways that we can really attract wildlife to our landscape. So this is the FFL program crash course, Wildlife in Your Landscape. And today, as part of this program, we're going to kind of jump into a little bit of the details of the principles of the Florida-friendly landscaping program. So like I begin all of my programs, I like to have essential questions. So with these essential questions, what they are those two big questions that you should feel a little bit more confident or comfortable answering at the end of today's program. So these questions are, what is the Florida-friendly landscaping program? And what are the essential elements to attracting wildlife to our landscapes? So before we jump in too far into the Florida-friendly landscaping program, I want you to tell me, and you can put this in the chat box, what are some of the things that you like about wildlife in your landscape, or some of your little experiences that you like to have, some different types of birds or other wildlife that visit? Put that in the chat box. I like that. All of it, all of them. Excuse me. Oh yeah, I love having pollinators come into my landscape. Oh, I like that too. The entertainment. Wildlife does provide such a significant entertainment and value to us in our landscapes. Yeah, just a whole other level of life that brings in. Because we've probably all seen it before. Landscapes or gardens that they may look pretty or have high aesthetic quality, but at the end of the day, it might just seem like, I don't know, still sterile, lifeless. And having some of that wildlife in there and using it, it gives it so much more life and energy in that space. So it does bring a garden to life. That's great. Yeah, 100%. When we do that, yeah, it allows us to feel like we're part of an environment, part of the ecosystem, not damaging it or hurting it. We're part of it, not over it. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, you have an assortment of different birds, but also you have some otters. Great. What about, do we all have any nuisance wildlife? I think it's important to think about what is a nuisance. But do y'all have any wildlife that's like they can be problematic sometimes in your garden? Moles, armadillos. Yeah, armadillos. Snakes, subjective. I like having them. They don't bother me, but I know they do for some. Yeah, but they're so important. There are pest control. Yeah, squirrels, raccoons. Now, granted, I used to live in Alachua County and we had squirrels everywhere. And ever since I moved to Nassau County, now obviously we have squirrels, I see them, but just doesn't seem as much, which I'm kind of okay with. Yeah, and the raccoons. And I know for some people that live on Amelia Island, rabbits have become a real nuisance, especially if you're kind of like along the marsh area or Egan's Creek. Not the marsh rabbits, but we do have some naturalized populations of like bunnies that were just dropped off in our natural areas and they just reproduce uncontrollably. So, and that creates an issue. Wonderful. So as part of today's program with us, Wildlife in the Landscape, we're going to put a lot of emphasis on the importance of attracting wildlife, why that Florida-friendly landscaping plays a significant role in attracting, like why it plays a role in helping create ecosystems, environments for wildlife. So not only are we going to be talking about, yeah, we have that value of wildlife that we can attract to it for our personal pleasure or personal reasons, but then we're also going to kind of show us like how that role of a Florida-friendly landscape can actually help provide something important to our wildlife and why it's important to have FFLs with regards to diversity in wildlife populations. So, but anyway, so let's talk a little bit about why the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is important. So you've seen this map sitting up on your screen for a little bit now. And it is this looks, and you all probably seen this before. A lot of you have probably seen this before. I show this with a lot of my Florida Friendly Landscaping programs. But this is the state of Florida, and this is looking at population and population development and where we're seeing these developed lands throughout the state. And then also that's what we see in the red, and then in that darker green color, that's land that's held in conservation in perpetuity. So that includes like state forest, state parks, et cetera, conservation easements. And then the kind of like the beigey color, that's just your undeveloped. It's not, it's like agricultural areas, or it's held land holdings, et cetera. Or it doesn't have those protections on it. But nonetheless, this is what the state of Florida looks like. And back in 2005, based off of our population, but Florida is growing quickly. Nassau County is growing quickly. It's one of the fastest growing counties in the state. Not the fastest, but one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And in the state of Florida, on a daily basis, we are seeing 1,000 people move to the state. So based off of these population trends and these development trends, we're able to kind of anticipate what will the state look like between the 2005 and 2060. And this is part of the Florida 2060 plan, where we actually look at where the state pressure is going to exist. And this is a plan that's part of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and as part of working with the university and some other partners with it. But they kind of looked at the state and kind of said, where are these localized pressures going to occur on our natural resources? And based off of our development trends, we have the ability to kind of anticipate what will Florida look like in 2060 as our population doubles. So we're actually looking at a map that goes from this in 2005 to roughly this in 2060. So that's looking at all the developed land. So that's institution, residential, commercial, et cetera. So that's all that developed space. And that's just to accommodate our growing population based off of our existing development trends. So will there be flexibility in this? Absolutely, there will be. But nonetheless, it kind of raises a reasonable, I want to say, concern. I don't want to say, yeah, concern is, as the population is going to double, we can anticipate that the other things that we're dealing with in the state are going to double as well. So with that population growth expected to be double by 2060 from the 2005 plan, there's going to be an increased demand for water. There's going to be, as a result, an increased pollution, because non-point source pollution, so like impervious surfaces, roadways, sidewalk, homes, et cetera, are all increasing. So that stormwater has to go somewhere, and that can increase pollution as well. And then in addition, because we develop, we lose those habitats that help filter polluted runoff before it enters the aquifer, but it's also reducing that critical habitat for our environment and for Florida's ecosystem to function properly. So it's really important to think about, with that population growth, what are we going to do, or what can we do to help mitigate those change and mitigate that change the best possible to help minimize the impacts of Florida's growing demands. So one way that we think about that is through how we are managing our landscapes. So when we look at landscapes, we actually know that approximately 60% of homeowner water use in Florida is attributed to lawn and landscape irrigation. That's a lot of water, 60% used for irrigation. So it's really easy to think is like, okay, if we can significantly reduce irrigation or completely eliminate its use, all of a sudden we can meet our double water demands with our existing infrastructure, no problem, or existing usage. But that's much easier said than done, of course. So we need to think about the impacts of landscaping, because it's not necessarily become something that the entire thinking about what we need to do as an entire state, but also what can we do from an individual. From a neighborhood, to a community, to a county, to the statewide. Every little change that we can make can have a significant impact. But the really, really cool thing is, by thinking about how we're managing landscapes, we can actually have do have much healthier landscapes by reducing a lot of these inputs by following just basic best management practices. And that is where the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program comes into play. So the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is our statewide initiative that talks all about the best ways to manage our landscapes. It's not an aesthetic management, because the great thing about the FFL program is it's really looking about like, how do we make the proper plant selections? Because we can it's kind of like an integrative approach into maintaining an attractive, colorful, and diverse yard. It's friendly to wildlife. It's environmentally responsible, and it can be less work than a traditional landscape. No problem. Actually, it is less work. So it's a kind of some of the things that the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program has dealt with in the past has always been, Florida Friendly landscapes look weedy or messy, but no, there's no aesthetics to them. So you can actually have a Florida Friendly landscape in an HOA, no problem, that fits those aesthetic requirements, assuming we follow these basic principles. But ultimately, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program comes back to conserving water, protecting water quality, and also helping enhance and protect these natural areas for wildlife and biodiversity. And to help do that, we have our basic list of 9 principles. And these 9 principles, by just following these, can help create a landscape that requires significantly less inputs. It reduces our work that goes into it so we can enjoy our yards more and work less. So by just knowing these principles and being aware of these principles can really improve how you're maintaining your landscape. So the first principle is right plant, right place. Second one is water efficiently. Third is fertilize appropriately. The fourth is mulch. 5 is attracting wildlife. 6 is manage yard pest. 7, recycle. 8, reduce stormwater runoff. And 9, protect the waterfront. So there's a lot of different strategies that we can do within each one of these principles. But ultimately, by starting with right plant, right place, we can set ourselves up for success in our landscapes. Because if we put a plant that's the right plant in the right place, it will be successful. It can live off the conditions in which we are planting them, no problem. And it allows them to naturally thrive by just what's given to them without any or minimal inputs. So with today's program, as part of attracting wildlife and thinking about wildlife, we're going to focus on 2 of these core principles, and that is that right plant, right place, and attract wildlife. So we're going to dive into more detail on right plant, right place, and attracting wildlife, especially attract wildlife. I did have one question that did come in. It says, are rain barrels or rain buckets, cisterns, are they allowed in Florida? And the cisterns and rain barrels, they all fall within water efficiently and reduce stormwater runoff, which we have additional programs that we do in our extension office all about those. But in a nutshell, yes, absolutely. So if we lived out west, there are Western water rights that can make it a little bit more difficult to have rain barrels because of the laws of prior appropriation. But we don't have those Western water rights in essentially east of the Mississippi River. So we have different requirements on regulations on our waters, and so that enables us to actually have those cisterns and those rain barrels. So use them as you wish. You can use them to collect stormwater, and then you can use that stormwater as a way to provide irrigation to your plants, because you can easily hook up a downspout to a cistern or a rain barrel. Cisterns hold a lot more water, but you catch more than enough rainfall on the roof of a single family house to provide supplemental irrigation for your landscape. For like, in 1 year, you collect about 2.3 years worth of water for your landscape. And that includes like turf grass and all that stuff. So it's a great way to think about, how can I just use stormwater in such a way where rather than just letting it go down my storm drain, I'm capturing it and then I can use it back in my landscape, because that can reduce those total inputs significantly. So Great question. That's a very, very good question. I've had that question before about are those allowed or not? Absolutely, they are. So let's jump a little bit into right plant, right place. And I actually want to show you all a website. This is a little bit different than what I've done before in this class, but I do want to show you all a website. Let me pull it up. So when we think about right plant, right place, it really relates to what plant material or plant material thrive in certain environmental conditions. And what happens is if we take those plants that thrive in those environmental conditions, in certain environmental conditions, or plant them in the conditions that they prefer, they'll do great. So if you put a plant that loves full sun, put it in full sun. Don't put it in deep shade. It will not do well there. Because what ends up happening is when we match those plants to those correct conditions, they will naturally do well in those landscapes. And when they are doing well in those landscapes, you don't have to irrigate. They're drought tolerant, or that input significantly decreases, because typically you won't have to fertilize them. You won't have to do supplemental irrigation, pruning periodically, but not much. But right plant, right place allows your landscape to thrive. And if your landscape is thriving, that's less pest that you have to deal with, because your plants are happy. They can be more resilient, or they can help fight those off naturally. So there's less pest in your landscape. You can have a more dynamic landscape. So again, it comes back to what I like to say is you enjoy your landscape more and work less. And I have this web page pulled up already, but I want to ask you all, when we're thinking about right plant, right place, what are some of those environmental conditions that you may think about when that may impact how well a plant will do in a landscape? Like we talked about sun availability. So do they prefer full sun or part sun or full shade? What are some other things that you think about? Yeah, soil drainage. Does your soil drain really well, or is it soaked and it's holding a lot of moisture constantly? That's a great one. Yeah, temperature. Yeah, temperature is a big one. So we always use USDA hardiness zones. So USDA hardiness zones are kind of like our standardized, like median average, like temperature in the winter, or low temperatures. And we use that to kind of determine these different temperature ranges, and allows us to pick which plants do well in our areas based off of climate. And in Nassau County, we're actually split. So if you're in West Nassau County, you are in, I'm putting this in the chat box, you are in zone 8B. If you're in Eastern Nassau, you're going to be in zone 9A. Typing that up. So the west side of the county is predominantly 8B, and the right side of the county is 9A. So essentially, that just means the west side of the county, on average, is cooler than the east side of the county. And that can have an impact on some of the plants that we choose. And there's not too big a differences between the plant choices between 8B and 9A, but I do know that, like, you know, some of the plant material that we see in zone 9A, I've seen people plant sea grape. That can't grow on the west side of the county. Or, you know, on the west side of the county, dogwood and red buds will still do pretty well, but they're not going to do as well on the east side of the county, just because we're kind of like on that edge of where they start to do well. So other things that we start to see have to do with soil pH. So some plants really like acidic soils, and others like something maybe a little bit more alkaline. So soil texture will definitely have an impact on soil drainage and how well it holds moisture and different nutrients. Yeah. Salinity, that's a really, really good one, especially for coastal areas. So you have to think about salt tolerance. Some plants are fine with salt, some are not at all. So great. These are all really good examples. One that I also like to think about is the height and size. How big does something get at maturity? So it makes more sense as like, oh, I have this 3x4 space that would be great to put a shrub in. I don't want to put something in that gets 12 feet tall because I'm constantly going to have to prune it to keep it down at the size that I need it. And, you know, periodically pruning is okay, but if you're having to constantly prune to keep something down to a controlled height, it's probably the wrong plant for the wrong place. It's best to select a plant that you know how big it's going to get at maturity, because you're not going to have to prune it as much. And I mentioned this before. One of my landscaping pet peeves is a sweet viburnum or any type of large shrub in front of a window, because they grow super quickly and they're going to block your window, and it's a huge security issue. So why not just plant something that stays small in the first place so you don't have to prune it constantly? Because like a sweet viburnum, that will actually get 15 to 20 feet tall. It's kind of like a large shrub, small tree. So putting them in front of windows is not a good idea. But I want to show you all this website, and I'm going to give you this in the chat box, this link, because, and you'll get this in the follow-up email I sent to everybody, but this is our plant selection app. So the FFL plant selection app, I'm going to pull it over this screen. Can you all see it? Put this in the chat box. Wonderful. So this is on our Florida Friendly Landscaping webpage, and this is just our plant selection app, and it's really cool because you can visit it through your internet browser, or you can actually pull it up through your app store on your phone, whether you have an Apple or an Android. We have a few other cool resources, like there's one about fertilizer ordinances, toxic plants, butterfly gardening, and bee gardens. But this plant guide is a great one. So you go in here, you can select browser. I just usually hit see all plants. And then I actually come down here and I hit filter. And it gives you a bunch of little options, and you can kind of go through and you can select them. So say I want to do I want to get some ornamental grasses in my landscape. So I can select ornamental grasses, and there's some more conditions, like if there's specific shapes you want, etc. And it's like, I want something that would probably do well in part shade to full sun. And then I live in 9A, so I'll select that. And for today's purpose, we'll say it attracts any wildlife. And I'm not going to be concerned about salt tolerance, so I won't select it. And then down here, you can actually choose, you know, if you want a native plant or not. So I'll pick native. So we'll say I want to do a native plant for this. So I picked some of these categories, and I can hit filter, and it'll pull up some of like these prime plants that fit all of these characteristics. So one is this wiregrass, which I actually really like wiregrass. And you can come in here, you can look at photo of the plant. Some of the plants will have a couple more photos. It gives you that hardiness zone. So 8A to 11, it's native to Florida. It'll show you some more conditions. It prefers full sun. It likes sandy clay, well-drained to wet soils. It prefers acidic to slightly acidic soils, a pH. It has low to none salt tolerance. So I definitely want to put this along, like right if I lived on the coast. It has high drought tolerance. And it gives you more information about appearance, like that, the size, the spread, the height. It's an evergreen plant. So, and then down here it says it attracts birds. So this is a cool little website that you can use. It's free to use, free to download, free to upload, and it's constantly changing and building. So it's a super handy website. So here's Fakahatchee grass. That's one that's commonly used as an ornamental grass. And a nice thing is a lot of the plants that you see within this plant selection app, part of the selection criteria to be included in this app is they have to be readily available. You have to be able to find them at nurseries, because there's a lot of great plants that will be wonderful, right plant, right place, but they're not always easy to find. And they're not always going to be traded within the nursery industry. So I'm keeping the same, we'll do this example one more. I'm keeping everything the same, but then I'm going to pick large shrubs and small shrubs to kind of see what it shows. And it'll give me a whole list of different plants that will grow well in those environmental conditions that we selected. So this is one of many resources. I really like this, and it's a great one to have on your phones or have access to, especially when you're just trying to make those decisions. But the most important thing is think about your landscape. Where do you want to put plants? And then think about, how do those environmental conditions exist or look like throughout the year? Are they, is that landscape you're thinking about putting plants in? It might be sunny right now, but it might be more shade later when we think about that seasonal change throughout the year. So you got to think about that landscape, of that area that you're planting in your garden, and try to determine what's the best plant to use in that place. So one other important thing about right plant, right place, because what we want to do is think about right plant, right place, because that's always that first step. But we also need to think about, okay, if we want to attract wildlife to our landscapes, we need to consider that other additional layer to our plant selection criteria. But it is so important to think about still what types of plants will do well in our landscapes. And when you look at this picture on here, what do you think about? You can put that in the chat box. Those big red berries. What do you think? Bird food. Birds. Yeah. It is bird food. Birds do eat it. Birds definitely eat this. Do you all know what this is? Close. Close. That's it. This is coral ardesia. Ugh. It does look a lot like a holly, and it is confused sometimes with a holly. We do have some coral ardesia in Nassau County. We have Brazilian pepper, which is also commonly confused with holly trees. But this is coral ardesia, and this is an incredibly invasive plant. So it's so important for us to think about our plant selection, because yes, birds eat these seeds, but then they poop out those seeds and they spread that seed. And then this takes over some of our ecosystems, and it ends up displacing wildlife because it's out competing a lot of their food sources. So knowing what plants are in our landscapes and what kind of plants we select is going to be so important. So we need to make sure that whenever we're selecting plants, we're very aware that we are not selecting an invasive plant species. So an invasive plant species is any plant that essentially it's non-native to Florida. It was introduced, it could have been introduced in many different ways, but it's non-native to Florida. And then what ends up happening is it takes over natural areas, it's naturalized, and starts displacing some of our wildlife and our ecosystem, causing damage to it, or it's causing destruction to agriculture. So it's like, oh man, Taylor, it's a whole other level of complexity. It's like, yeah, it is. It is. Fortunately, you can't buy this at the store. Coral ardesia is listed by the state as a noxious weed, and noxious weeds are actually, based state statute, they are illegal to trade, transport, buy, sell, etc., unless you have a specific license saying that you have the ability to do that. Good luck getting one of those. But anyways, there is another website that you can go to where you can actually learn about different types of invasive species throughout the state. For plant material. There's two, but this is the one that I'm going to send you all. This is our IFAS assessment webpage. And this is actually a great resource to kind of go on and see, is this plant invasive? Is it not? So it's just another little handy thing to keep in your back pocket. And even though this plant is illegal to buy, sell, trade, etc., and it's highly invasive as a noxious weed, we still need to be aware that just because a plant is invasive doesn't mean that it can't be sold or bought or traded. You can go to any plant nursery, and in their stocks, they're going to have invasive species that you can walk out the door with and buy. So starting to become aware of some of those common invasive species is important. One common one is called Mexican petunia. And actually, I'll show you a picture of Mexican petunia. This is that IFAS webpage, that IFAS assessment webpage. Oh, I'll just do it this way. So Ruellia simplex, or just Ruellia, not all Ruellias, we actually have a native one, but this Ruellia simplex, you have probably all seen this before. It's invasive. It spreads. You can buy it at any store around Nassau County pretty much. We do have a native Ruellia, and it's wonderful. And it does spread pretty aggressively, but it's not an invasive species. But these specific plants, yeah, it's invasive. You can buy it at the store, no problem. So it's important to just start to be aware that just because you can buy it from the store does not mean that it is safe to have and buy for our landscapes. So now let's go into some of the more meat. Any of you have any questions about invasive species before we jump forward? Because I wanted to show that resource to everybody. All right, wonderful. So we talked about right plant, right place. We know that if we select the most appropriate plant for our landscape that fits we're putting that plant in the conditions it naturally thrives in. It's going to significantly reduce the amount of inputs, makes our landscape so much easier to maintain. And it just makes everything easier. But then we start to think about, okay, how do I make sure I am planting a landscape that's not only right plant, right place, but it's helping attract wildlife to our landscapes. And that's where the fifth principle that attracts wildlife comes into play. So we think about that urbanization, that growth. So we looked at that map at the very beginning of the presentation about how Florida is changing and growing. And what ends up happening is we have that urbanization that's growing outwards. So what we're starting to see is what we call habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is essentially, it's just breaking apart that important habitat. And it can be caused by development or natural disaster, because I guarantee you, as a result of Hurricane Ian, there has been significant habitat fragmentation that has occurred. But when we start putting that and development together, that can lead to some pretty significant impacts. So on this image that you see on the screen, that left contiguous section, that's just like one big swath of natural area. And in that big swath of natural area, we have what we call that interior habitat and that edge habitat. So the more interior habitat, the larger it is, the better and healthier that ecosystem is, the environment is, because you're having a much higher population of larger fauna species. The diversity is there. It's a happier, there's more food sources available. And that edge habitat can become where you may not see that same diversity right along those edges, because they move inward as much as possible, or they move outward and leave and try to go to other places before they start competing for resources from one another. So that edge habitat also ends up becoming these areas where you might end up having wildlife-human interactions or conflicts that can occur. So like, we're totally fine with Florida panthers all over the state and bears all over the state, right? But the minute they start coming into your yard, you might say, well, yeah, we might have a little concern we have to think about, because, well, they're dangerous, but they're also wild animals and they're important to our environment and ecosystem. But it's important to think about that the more we fragment that, the more their resources become depleted. So we start creating these fragmented landscapes where the interior habitats decrease and those edge habitats are increasing, because we have much more of those edges, that edge effect, those perimeter spaces around those interior spaces. So then all of a sudden, wildlife is having to move from fragment to fragment to fragment. And every time they're moving fragment to fragment, that creates conflict, because that's where, well, we're at. That's where we have roadkill issues. That's where we have issues with like wildlife human interaction conflict. So these are these things that we need to consider and think about, because what ends up happening is as that wildlife is fragmented, we start to see declining populations, and as well as the genetic diversity starts to decline us too. So that has a significant impact on the quality of the wildlife in there, and that then will then have a continued impact on the population. So knowing that that occurs as part of this fragmentation is very kind of scary, because the more we fragment, the less we have to support that wildlife. So when we have that loss of interior habitat, that increase of habitat edge effect creates that conflict zone. And then overall, we're going to have a decrease of habitat quality, reproduction success, and genetics diversity. So it's important to think about that as we grow, we're changing this ecosystem significantly. And that's when we think about this map. So imagine what we're going to start seeing between now in Nassau County and 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060, and beyond. You know, what are we doing, or what can we do? So to kind of like walk through, you know, maybe like the progression of how we think about wildlife in our landscapes, we're going to walk a little through this progression that I have here, thinking about what that role the Florida-friendly landscaping program can have, because our Florida-friendly landscapes become a catalyst or become an opportunity for us to kind of think about how can we bridge these gaps of fragmented landscapes the best to our capacity. So looking at an unimpacted habitat and then becomes it fragmented as part of development. So as that becomes fragmented as part of development, you know, we start seeing that decrease of habitat and genetic diversity and reproduction success. But then we can start to say, okay, what can we do? What can we do? Well, we can think about, all right, I create my home. I take my home and I make it a little pollinator garden, or I make it a little birding little habitat. It helps bridge a gap. It's one more little gap that helps create a space for animals to move habitat to habitat. So think of it as kind of like a home base. For instance, if wildlife is wanting to move between these different natural areas or move around safely, you can create that with your home. You can create a place where they can come, they can rest, they can reproduce, they can live if they wanted to, depending on the size of the species, and then they can move on. So you're creating this localized safe haven for wildlife in your landscape. But think about taking one more step. Think about one more step. Think about it like as your local planning action groups or working with your elected officials, et cetera. You can make bigger decisions that can have bigger impacts. So think all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe it's not necessarily just my home that makes this decision, but what about my neighborhood, my community, my HOA? We start to implement different rules, regulations, or opportunities for homeowners to be able to work together to create these habitats. Because like all of a sudden, what if we take a park that then brings in some of these beneficial habitat structures that can attract wildlife? It's like, okay, all of a sudden, it's not going to be prime habitat compared to just natural areas, but you're creating a larger zone of safety and protection for that wildlife to exist. And then take a step further. It's like we get our neighborhood starting to get involved, a couple homes here and there. We can also think about greenways, the value that greenways play in helping connect some of these fragmented areas. There are greenways that serve both as human corridors, but as wildlife corridors as well. And by doing that, that helps then create these safe passages that start to reconnect these fragmented landscapes. So obviously connecting these fragmented landscapes isn't necessarily that's just in at the home, but the home or the individual home can be a critical component in helping reconnect these fragmented wildlife or these wildlife spaces. So the home, that community, and in a regional development pattern, we can adopt these principles from the FFL program for attracting wildlife to help bridge and reconnect some of these areas that are damaged by wildlife fragmentation or habitat fragmentation. But then even one step further, we can even adopt conservation easements. So areas that become additional conservation and in perpetuity that can actually help connect different fragmented wildlife areas. So some of the great examples are like the Florida Greenway. That's a great example of, that's a big fundraising opportunity with the state, even using some state appropriated funds to help buy high value landscape areas to help create these conservation regions, to help reconnect them. So, you know, and it's proven to be significantly beneficial. So those are conservation easements, and that's obviously from a homeowner perspective, you know, maybe not, but I do know that there are homeowners that have owned a lot of property and they actually designate big portions of their property being conservation. So now let's take a road back. So yes, there's multiple strategies we can think about. We can think about our home. We can think about our neighborhood, our community. We can think about how these different strategies can help connect them. These decisions can be done in an individual method, but also it can come from working with our community to make these bigger decisions. But the most important thing to know is that even if we're making the smallest decisions in our landscapes with regards to Florida-friendly landscaping programs and water conservation, helping protect water quality and attracting wildlife, that little change still has that little impact. And the more that we add to it, the bigger that impact becomes. So if we want to think about our homes and attracting wildlife to our houses, what do we need to attract wildlife? I always like doing this transition. I like doing this transition. So I went and talked to this guy. You all know, probably know Bear Grylls. He and I are good buddies. We're not, just kidding, never met the guy. But if you were to ask Bear Grylls or anybody that's a survivalist, I was actually watching that new show Alone. I think it's on Netflix. I can't remember, one of those mini stations. And it's all the same. Doesn't matter who you talk to. If you're to say, what do we need to attract wildlife? If you talk to any of those guys, they will tell you, well, these are the things that we need in order to survive. If I don't have these, I can't survive. And the same thing is for wildlife. So if we were to ask Bear Grylls, hey, Bear, what are the things that you need to survive in the wild? They'll be the same exact things. And this is what he will tell you. He says you need shelter, fire, water, food, in that order. When I actually used to teach wilderness survival years ago, and those were the order of things that you build, assemble, collect in order to survive in the wilderness. You prioritize shelter, fire, water, food. Without those, you can't survive. And there's actually this whole theory, these hierarchy of needs. And when we look at these hierarchy of needs, it's not necessarily just surviving for wildlife, but it's just like, if we're thinking about ourselves, psychological survival or just survival of just living life, we have these basic psychological needs in this hierarchy of needs, these basic needs: food, water, warmth, rest, safety needs, security, safety. Those are the big things. Those are the big things. It's the same thing for wildlife. If we have the ability in our landscapes to provide these basic needs, food, water, a place for protection, so like shelter, rest, warmth, that gives them an opportunity to feel safe, that they can come in, they can survive, they can reproduce, they can have offspring, they can move and be happy and go to different areas, etc. So if we think about those basic needs, we will attract wildlife to our homes. So what do you want to attract wildlife in your landscape? Go ahead and put that in the chat box. What are some of the things that you think about that you would like to attract? I know earlier, we had some discussion on like birds, pollinators, but now that you're thinking about it, what would you like to attract? Pollinators, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Butterflies. Yeah. Bees, birds. more of everything. I know, like, I met somebody one time, it's like they had a big parcel of property and they were maintaining their property, you know, kind of a natural area because they wanted gopher tortoises. Gopher tortoises are an endemic species. In other words, they are only exist in our part of the world. That's it, endemic species. And they are so important to just natural ecosystem function, which is a really cool read to go learn about the gopher tortoise's role in a fire-dependent ecosystem. David Attenborough actually has a really cool documentary video about gopher tortoises. But nonetheless, this person is maintaining a landscape so they can help maintain that vital ecosystem environment for a gopher tortoise, which is really, really cool. You know, it's like we think about other butterflies, bees, yeah, ladybugs, beneficial insects, yeah, all sorts of wildlife that we can attract. So one of the really neat things is when we think about what we want to attract, usually when we attract one specific species, we start to bring in a lot more. Even though we didn't design intentionally for them, they will come to that landscape as well. So, and you just like, I love having that photo of the the egret on the alligator because it's such a Florida photo. It's like alligators play in such an important role in our landscapes, and I think, or in our ecosystems, and that's a great example of a species that has a lot of conflict with humans. But usually they completely leave us alone. They don't bother us at all. They usually become a nuisance if, as a result of something that we've done, like feeding them. Don't feed wildlife ever. That's a really bad idea. And then that creates that conflict. And then they end up suffering the repercussions from our bad decisions. But, which I know you all know, but nonetheless, when we think about what do we want to attract, usually when we attract or design for one specific, you know, animal or one group of wildlife, subsector wildlife, however you want to say it, you start to attract more than just one. You start to bring in a whole lot more. And actually, one of our researchers from the University of Florida, he will actually say, if you design for birds, you design for all wildlife. And it's kind of true. If you just start to think about what do birds need and you bring those in, you're creating habitat that's beneficial for pretty much any other wildlife that can come into your landscape. So when we think about some of these tips for designing for wildlife or attracting birds to our landscapes, these are these 7 tips that we like to share. Provide food, of course. What kind of food? And we'll go over each one of these, but provide food, supply water, leave snags. I love snags. Manage pets. That's very, very important. Reduce insecticide use, reduce mowed lawn areas, and increase vertical layering. So, first one, provide food. So what kind of food do you need in your landscape? You know, there's great ways that we can provide foods, like specific bird feeders is one. Here's a Baltimore Oriole just kind of hanging out on a half an orange, munching away. You have some food pellets, so you can provide and bring food in for some of our birds. But you can also have just plant material that help provide that food for them. But it's important to think seasonally, because you don't want to just have all your plants fruit and produce food at one time of the year and then have nothing else during the rest of the year. You want to try to think about that seasonality to some of those plants that are growing in your landscape to help provide food throughout the year. So, you know, great examples, like earlier we mentioned holly trees. Yay! Holly trees, Yopon hollies, birds love them. Wildlife love them. That creates great aesthetic quality to a landscape. Of course, we don't eat the berries. They're highly toxic to us, but for a lot of other birds, at least, it's very, very attractive to them. But we have, you know, beautyberry, red mulberry, and when they're all flowering, you know, if you've ever looked at a holly tree, like a Yopon holly or an East Palatka holly or American holly, when they are flowering, they are covered in pollinators, all sorts of bees. You'll see butterflies, moths will come to them, but they're coming in for that nectar sources. It's wonderful. So it's important to think seasonally. When do things fruit? When do they flower? do you have something kind of provided throughout that entire year? And if you don't, that does become an opportunity to make sure you're providing some type of supplemental, maybe food source out in your landscape. Because of course, what we can plant in our landscape, we're limited on our size of our landscape as well. Sometimes we have plant space, sometimes we have enough for a few pots and containers on our porch. But nonetheless, think about that seasonality of plants and the other plants that do produce fruit. Like I love the mulberries, like our red mulberry. They're delicious, so you can munch on some too, and it still produces more than enough, so it'll attract all sorts of animals to eat it. Beauty berries fruiting right now, which I love. Oh man, I love beautyberry. One of our native shrubs. I love it. Once you see it, you always see it. But it's a prolific fruiting plant, and it creates those big clusters of that purple fruit all along the stems of the plant. But some other ways, and not necessarily just the edible things, but like I mentioned, those flowering plants, what's providing those nectar sources for different butterflies and other pollinators, and how you can make sure that they are in your landscape as well. Water. So water is, vital for everyone. If you didn't have any water, you'd be unbelievably thirsty. Same thing goes for birds and butterflies. All wildlife need water. So thinking about wildlife and water sources is going to be very important. So a bird bath is a classic. Bird baths are wonderful. The one thing is you always have to make sure you clean them periodically, rinse them out, change the water. My parents recently built a new bird bath out of just ceramic pots. They just stacked up and they glued them together and stuff, and they painted them, and it looks really nice. And they have the big ceramic tray filled with water. And then what they did is to kind of keep the water moving so it doesn't, so mosquito larvae can't grow in it, is they just got like a solar powered, just little water bubbler that goes on there, and the birds come down, they clean themselves, all that stuff, they fly off. And then every few days or so, they'll just go out with a hose and just kind of like spray it down and fill it back up and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, that's a creative way, and it helps provide water to those birds. And the cardinals, especially the cardinals, love playing in that. And my mom loves it when it's all the little fledglings start to come down, and they'll land on the edge of the bird feeder or their bird bath and kind of just like hang out and play in the water. So that's a great source for bathing, drinking, etc. But we also think about butterflies need some water as well. But butterflies do it a little bit differently than birds. So it's best for butterflies to have little shallow areas, think of like a little beach resort for your butterflies. They like that shallow puddles of water. So it's easy to kind of build those into a landscape. Or just have some areas that, like, sometimes it's kind of neat to have like a little rock feature that has like little pockets and grooves in it, because that'll fill up with water in those pockets and grooves, and that becomes a great place for those butterflies as well. So a leaf, a snag, a tree snag. So essentially, one of the most valuable things you can have in your landscape is a dead tree. I love it. The only dead trees that I would ever recommend taking down is if it's a large tree that if it were to fall, it's going to fall on something very, very important like a home, or cause damage, significant damage. But if you have a dead tree and if it were to fall and not land on anything, keep it. Let it stay there if it's in your landscape, because tree snags provide a significant amount of environmental or like habitat for different types of species and wildlife. So one really cool thing is you'll have a lot of your native birds will come in, and they actually bore holes in them and they can nest inside of them. It's wonderful. But a tree snag can provide cover and nesting for over 40 species of birds and animals. And same thing, not just vertically, but if you just let that sucker, if it does fall over and it's not in the way, just leave it there. A brush pile works just as well. These are significant. We think about birds as well. They can roost up there and they can survey the landscape, and they're looking for pests and other things in the landscape, and they're actually helping manage a lot of those pests you may have in your landscape because you're providing them a location for them to hunt. So that's another little bonus of having those there. So this is important to also think about managing pets. So this is Nemo. Nemo was a neighborhood cat, and I would always find Nemo with voles or moles or some type of animal because he loved my son. So therefore, he would always bring his tributes to my son. I don't even know who owned him. He just had a tag named Nemo, but he was always bringing us stuff. He was a super sweet cat, but the important thing is cats are really good hunters. And a lot of our cats that live outside can actually scare away wildlife. They kill cats specifically, like domesticated cats that are living outside can kill, they on average 1.3 to 4 billion birds and 6.3 to 22.3 billion mammals annually, globally as well. That's a lot. That's a lot. And that's bad because that's having a significant impact on a lot of our native or native fauna species. And that comes from this article, that data, that impact of free-ranging domestic cats on wildlife of the United States. So it's important to think about that when we have our cats. Like with my cats, they stayed inside. One was declawed, so he had to stay inside, but we just didn't, the other one we wanted to stay inside because we didn't want that impact on our wildlife. So managing pets is going to be really, really important, especially when we start thinking about cats. Now, of course, not all of our cats are indoor, outdoor, or outdoor cats only, but we're also deal with like feral cat species, et cetera. And that's why there are some really cool nonprofit organizations that help monitor and work with feral cat populations. So managing pets, because that has a huge impact. So even in your yard, if you have a pet that's wandering outside, can have a big impact on that wildlife in a negative way. So, and we'll talk a little bit about managing pets because, in certain capacity, you can benefit a little bit from having your pet in your landscape, specifically dogs. So we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So another way that's really important is reducing your insecticide use. So a really cool thing is if you are bringing in a lot of different animals, like wildlife, like those birds, and they're going to come in and they're going to manage majority of the pests for you because they're going to be hanging out, they're happy, they're healthy, they're going to be looking for other food sources. So they're going to be munching on a lot of those things that actually are might be causing damage to your landscape. So it's also important to think about reducing our insecticide use because that has an impact on food for a lot of this wildlife, as well as improper use of insecticides or pesticides can have growing impacts on larger species. So if we can actually trace with some specific insecticides that insecticide into larger animals like birds and mammals because of what they eat, and that does have impacts. And as well as improper usage can lead to, like, we hear about neonicotinoid, which is a type of insecticide or pesticide that can have an impact on our pollinators because that insecticide might end up and can end up in the flowers. So if we have a flower and then here comes one of our pollinators or honeybees or whatever it might be, they can pick up that insecticide within that pollen and that can end up impacting them significantly, can kill them, it can lead to death, etc. So it's important to think about reducing insecticide use. And we do this by following integrated pest management. So this actually rolls over to another Florida-friendly landscaping principle. But when we think about integrated pest management, reducing insecticide use is the ultimate goal. So we think about how do we prevent pest issues from becoming an issue in the first place? That's just proper management. If we manage landscapes properly, and that starts with right plant, right place, our plants are naturally resilient. Our landscapes are naturally resilient. So we might end up getting bad insects or pests in our landscapes. But if our plants are happy and healthy, they're not going to that population won't thrive and it won't become problematic. And if we still follow that condition, if we make those cultural condition adjustments, there could still be problems that pop up, but also physical mechanical control is a great way to manage a lot of those pests that pop up. And then biological control. If you're bringing in wildlife, they're going to be doing a lot of that management for you. So then a lot of that, like very last ditch effort, you have wildlife in your landscape, you're doing physical mechanical control, you're following cultural controls as best as possible. There are chemical controls that you can use, but it's very, very rare or seldom that you get to that point that you actually have to use insecticides in your landscape. So we follow integrated pest management to help reduce pesticide and insecticide use within our landscapes, because that will help protect that beneficial wildlife and in our landscapes and in our environment in general. So reducing mowed lawn areas. So lawn and some of our turfgrass species actually do flower, and they will actually attract some pollinators. But if we want to make sure that we're increasing the diversity within our landscapes, we may need to reduce those mowed lawn areas, thinking about right plant, right place, those environmental conditions, that functionality of the landscapes. But if we can reduce, if we do have a lot of turfgrass areas, like we can easily reduce that, increase our ornamental landscape beds, and bring in some more of those pollinator plants that attract more pollinators and more diverse pollinators. But still important that, you know, with those ornamental landscapes, that we're thinking about not putting something in that's invasive, and also thinking about how, making sure that we're managing them those appropriately so they can be happy and healthy. And then the last one is increased layering. So sometimes this is easier to do if you have more space, but it's important to think that animals and wildlife all live, I mean, you probably all remember this from your basic biology classes, but different wildlife and environments kind of exist at these different heights, these different layers within our landscapes and our gardens. So, you know, we have like native butterflies that, you know, mistletoe. I couldn't think of it all of a sudden. Mistletoe is a host plant for a specific pollinator, a specific butterfly. But guess what? You'll never see that butterfly because they're usually living 30, 40, 50 feet up in the air. They never come down low. So it's important to think that environments and ecosystems exist for different species at these different layers. So if we think about ways to improve habitat structure by having various heights of trees or shrubs, it's not just all one tall tree and all one small shrub, but we're trying to fill the gaps in between. By increasing that layering within our landscapes with our plant selections, we're helping provide a diversity and depth to the types of wildlife we can actually attract to our landscapes. And I like this image because it actually shows what types of bird species you'll see at these different levels, like that ground layer, shrub layer, understory, and overstory canopy. So it's an interesting graphic because that's not commonly thought about, are those layers. So how can we improve and increase layering within our landscapes? So now coming over to this, do we want every animal in our landscape? You can put that in the chat box. Do we want every animal in our landscape? No. Yeah. Nope. Nope. I know. It's really fun to talk about attracting wildlife to the landscape, but in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, it's like, well, there is that deer that comes in, you know, there is that, you know, that rabbit that might come in. There's, you know, you start to think of those other wildlife. It's like, do we want every animal? It's like, no, you may not want every other animal, but at the same time, it's important to be aware that when we attract wildlife to our landscapes, we're bringing those things in that we may not want in our landscapes also. So it's important to kind of say, okay, I want wildlife in my landscape. So therefore, I'm going to have a bunny come in. I'm going to have that deer come in. That raccoon may come in too. Well, a raccoon will come in regardless of if you're attracting wildlife or not. If you have a trash can, a raccoon's going to come in. You know, same with an armadillo. So there are little things that we can think about is like, okay, do we want every animal that comes in? Because yeah, this bunny may look nice and fluffy, but do y'all know what this bunny's from? So this bunny may look nice and fluffy, but you never know what kind of danger it has with it. So there's like some things that we kind of consider animal pests, you know, like the ones I always hear about, like armadillo, rabbits, deer, some birds, not all birds, but some birds, skunk, squirrel, raccoon, fox, alligator, you know, bear, coyote. So there are animal pests, and that's a very subjective term, very, very subjective term. And if you don't know, this bunny comes from Monty Python, the Holy Grail. It's the bunny that looks all soft and squishy and then starts attacking everybody. But anyways, so we need to think about, are there some tips that we can do to help protect some of our sensitive plants in our gardens from some of these nuisance pests, nuisance animals? I think that's probably a better word to use. I'm going to take away pest. I'm going to say nuisance animal. So, so we look at for some possible deterrents. So that's my dog. That's Hobbs. He's hanging out. He's laying on the bed, but he acts as a decent deterrent, not the most amazing. But deterrents can be something like physical barriers, hazing, scare tactics, or there are some chemical repellents that you can use, and dogs actually can be a beneficial deterrent depending on the dog. But there are important big no-nos. So we'll go through each one of these real quick. But like some of those physical barriers can involve something like chicken wire, chicken fence. I don't like use bird netting because I'm always afraid a bird's going to get stuck in it and die. I don't like that. But you know, like if you're having issues with if you're planting something new, you know, putting deer fence around something can help. Putting chicken wire around and then like jamming it down in the ground can help keep a lot of those smaller animals out, like bunnies and bunnies. So there's physical barriers you can actually put in. And a lot of times, depending on the plant, is like once they're established and starting to grow, you can remove those. Yes, that's a good fit. That's a good point. Bird netting is also a concern for bats. Yeah, because like I don't know. It's a net. I'm afraid they're going to get caught, and I'd rather not have a net. It's like, you want to eat my pomegranate, go for it. So bird netting, I'm always afraid of using, but like some of those other barriers that just kind of impedes their movement coming in, that's fine. So yeah, what's a golf net? So you had a squirrel die in a golf net. Oh, like practice golfing. Yeah. Same thing. Yeah, they just get tangled up in it and they can't escape. Yeah. Sorry. Whoosh. I play a lot of golf, obviously. So these physical barriers, those work well. These hazing scare tactics, like some instances, like you can put in like fake birds, like fake owls that sit on the roost, or motion sensor water sprinklers. But the important thing to think about for these hazing scare tactics is the animals quickly realize, oh, you're just fooling me, and then disregard it. So you have to move them around the landscape periodically. If you don't move them, they lose their effect. There are some chemical repellents that can be effective, but it's just more of repellents. And sometimes you have to use like a combination of these. And then the dogs can be good repellents, because animals will just see dogs in the landscapes and it's like, that's a predator, I'm staying away. So like my dog Hobbs, he's a dingus. He's a huge goofball. He will chase every squirrel out of my parents' landscape when he's in their backyard. He will send them up a tree. They will never come down. But the little do the squirrels know that all he wants to do is just say hello to them and sniff them. He would have hurt a fly, but they don't know that. But it keeps them away, and he doesn't bother birds, which is really cool. You know, he's just more curious about the four-legged things that might run around. But whenever he's hanging out their house, the armadillos, the raccoons, they never come around, because my parents' dog, I mean, he doesn't care at all. But nonetheless, so dogs can be a good deterrent. But when we're thinking about animals and animal aggression, we still need to be concerned, because I used to have a dog a long time ago that, well, we would always find dead animals in our yard because he could catch them and he would kill them. He would kill bunnies. I've seen him catch a bird out of the air one time. A robin was flying through our backyard and he just ran up and just yank, grabbed them right out of the air. Not cool. So dogs can be deterrents, but you just need to just think about that a little bit. But some of the big no-nos are going to be nothing with sound vibrations. There's nothing that really helps support that science on the outdoors. Now interior, there's still some good science that kind of supports that for trying to push things out of your house, but nothing with sound and vibrations can actually have a major impact. But then also the thought is that even if it did, you're also pushing and repelling away the good things as well. Fumigants and tunnel flooding, it just kind of moves them around. It doesn't actually create a long-term fix. Mothballs, don't do it. Bad. It's actually on the label, not to be used outside. And then also, this is clearly, I've never heard of anyone doing this, but it's been personally, but it's been done before in the past, is don't use insecticides as a way to control invertebrates, because you can control invertebrates with a high dose of insecticide. But it's important to also know that that same rate that you're putting things down that could impact and kill an invertebrate is highly toxic to us. So those are all big no-nos. So usually those physical barriers, kind of creating hazing, scare tactics, and chemical repellents, and even if you have a dog, that can really help. Using a combination of those deterrents can be very helpful. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to send you all a document that actually shows, here's your nuisance animal, here's some preferred methods for trying to keep them away. So we've done a lot today. We talked a lot today. It's 4:45, just about. And we had these two big essential questions. What is Florida-friendly landscaping? And what are the essential elements to attracting wildlife to our landscape? So the FFL program is that statewide program that we have to help protect water quality, quantity, and protect water quality and quantity, as well as help support more biodiverse yards, which includes helping attract wildlife to our landscapes. And when we think about what are those essential elements to attracting wildlife to our landscapes, we did talk about food, the layering, tree snags, providing water. But the most important thing is thinking about that shelter, warmth, that protection, ways for them to feel protected, to hide, thinking about the water sources, thinking about that food sources, having those in your landscapes and having a diversity of them will help attract a lot of that wildlife to your landscape. And with that can come with nuisance pest or nuisance animals, but that's okay. That's okay if they come in, because we do have some strategies that can help protect our plants. Because yeah, deer may munch on my flowers that are in my landscape, but yeah, it's also really cool when a deer comes into my my landscape. I'd rather have that than keep them out completely. So, but anyways, so we should be able to comfortably answer these two essential questions after completing all this program now. If you do have any other additional questions, you can always reach out to me. We have our Nassau County Master Gardener Volunteer Help Desk contact. It's a little simpler to put in now. So that Nassau MGV at ifas.ufl.edu. And then you can also like us on Facebook or our YouTube channel. You can follow us there. We post all of the recordings of all of our webinars on online, so you can watch them later and other dates. So here's some other resources. I'll send you copies of all these resources, like the top 10 tips for success for backyards for wildlife, building for birds, butterfly gardening in Florida, and then also some of our Florida Friendly Landscaping Program publications. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And now we have the opportunity to kind of open up the floor for more questions that you may have about this specific program, or any other specific questions that you may have related to your Florida Friendly landscape. Yeah, sometimes a neighbor's dog can be that nuisance pest. Yeah, we've all seen the Christmas Story. Well, probably most of us seen the Christmas Story, the neighbor's dogs, all those hound dogs. Like I said, a dog can be a hit or miss. It depends on the temperament of a dog, I would guess.